Equality means for both sexes that they can choose, that every individual can choose for him or herself the way they want to live, whom they want to love, what things to do, how to feel, how to behave. And not like, if you're a man, you've got to behave this way. If you're a woman, you have to behave that way. Hello, everybody. I have been telling you last time about the first women's movement, or the first wave feminism, as it is also called, 18th and particularly 19th century. It came to an end due to the First World War. And some 50 years later, in 1968, the new, or the second, women's movement began. And interestingly, again, due to a revolution. I had told you how important revolutions had been for the first women's movement. Now, in 1968, some of you might remember, there was a new wave of demonstrations in many countries around the world. It began with protests against Vietnam, but it quickly got all different directions in different countries. The general idea was certainly about civil rights. And this time, also in my country and in many countries, the women got moving separately much earlier than in the 19th century. They realized this time much earlier that, again, they were not really meant to form part of it. Later, some witnesses told women that they had really only, in 68, they had really only been meant to make coffee, as they said, and type the manifestos of the men. But now they realized that wasn't what they wanted to do. How come, and I think that's interesting too, how come they realized this time so much earlier? Well, here you have my personal explanation. The first women's movement, 3 or 4 generations of them, one of the main aspects had been education, and they had won that battle. So now, in 1968, there were academically trained women, which there hadn't been before, of course. So they quickly, in a much quicker way, realized what was going on, and very quickly told other women what this was all about. There were trained historians, women, sociologists, psychologists, and that, I imagine, was how they separated from the men and fought for their own aims. The aims, of course, had also changed, naturally, because the first women's movement had brought many an aim successfully to an end. One of the main themes now, in 68 following, was women's body, women's sexuality, which perhaps the first women's movement had not yet dared talk about openly. Male violence, male suppression of women's bodies is as old as mankind, as humankind. We know that rape has been a part of warfare for as long as we know, 2,000-3,000 years. And it had just been accepted, so in the idea of, oh, well, you know, boys will be boys. No more in 68 following. The women were fed up of it. They called a spade a spade. They said that male violence against women was not acceptable. That is how women's shelters came into being. There hadn't existed any before, because openly it wasn't a subject to be discussed. Now, as it was brought into daylight, women's shelters came into being all around the place. Also, that there was violence against women within marriage. Even that now, that was a new idea, that it wasn't acceptable, neither violence of a man against his wife. Child abuse was another one, as much as we know, a very old problem. But you need a lot of courage to discuss it publicly. Abortion came, childbirth control, again into the discussion, had already been discussed without success though, and now abortion again. The right of women, let me say generally, the aim was the right of a woman, any woman, to decide about her own sexuality, her own body, if pregnant or not, and to say so and to decide on her own. Another subject was equality. Very important, that. Equality with men, of course. And not to make the same things as men. No. Equality means for both sexes that they can choose, that every individual can choose for him or herself the way they want to live, whom they want to love, what things to do, how to feel, how to behave. And not like, if you're a man, you've got to behave this way, if you're a woman, you have to behave that way. No, equality in this sense, open everything for both sexes, of course, very important too. And then another point, solidarity. You see, think about it, as long and for thousands of years, as woman was, and sometimes still is, totally dependent financially on a man, necessarily a competition between women arises. If we women have to fight for the richest man, the one with most influence, with the biggest car maybe, then naturally competition arises. Not a good thing, that at all. But if women have their own income, if they are independent for their lives, then, on the contrary, they can show solidarity with other women. In that context, something else I think is very important too. We, white Western women, were accused of speaking for colored women in other countries, in the so-called global south maybe. And they said that we white Western women don't know anything about the problems of a colored woman, say, in India. I think that argument is wrong. I really think so. I think I, as a white Western woman, have more in common with the dark-skinned woman in whichever country of the world than with a white man in my country. For a simple reason. We, women, all around the world, are made responsible for our children. Men in many countries father them, of course, but then take no responsibility for the children. It's us. And these days, we all women, no matter where we live and how rich or poor we are, these days, as we can have any kind of job, we're still made totally responsible for the upbringing of our children. That is one of the modern important subjects. How do you work, on the one hand, be independent financially, and yet have to look after the children, because many men just won't do it. Therefore, we women have a lot in common. Are we now in a third wave feminism? Is Me Too, is that the third wave? Or some historians think it's the end of the second. Some say this is already the third. I don't know. And it doesn't matter either, does it? But with Me Too, and that's interesting, again, women brought it to the fore. It were again women saying we have enough of powerful men using their power to subdue women, sexually often, but not only. And then look at, for example, a few years ago, the Arabic Spring. Women were at the forefront. Look at the demonstrations, the revolution in Belarus. 3 women at the top of the movement. Look at Iran right now. Women at the forefront. So we're not to be stopped, I tell you. We won't be stopped anymore, we women. And I beseech every woman to join fighting for a joint humanity, for an equality with men. And I would also like to invite every man to join with us, because that's our future, if you ask me. Together, we are going to be really strong and much better off. I wish you'd think about that. See you next time.